Thank you very much for joining me back here on the All Access Pass portion of my interview with Phillip Hellmich. Here, the author of God and Conflict, with incredible information, his story of having gone as a peacekeeper to Sierra Leone, having been there before and after the Civil War, having been a major component player within the development of peace training that actually prevented genocide in Sierra Leone. So then he's now come back. Time wrong? You weren't part of that? You weren't part of that ground for common things?
Well, a couple things. I was part of Search for Common Ground.
Yeah.
Which was, I don't want to take personal responsibility for all that work. There was like hundreds of staff members.
No, not Search. Okay. Welcome back to the All Access Pass interview, continuing here with Phillip Hellmich, the author of God and Conflict, and his incredible story of having gone to Sierra Leone as a peacekeeper before and then after or during the Civil War, and having been part of the Common Ground movement that was hugely, and I probably got that title wrong, but he can correct me in a bit, hugely responsible in shifting the field, the dynamics, the mindset of the people to become, instead of warring with each other, to becoming cooperative. And what worked not only individually, and we talked about what techniques can work individually to create peace within, he feels creating peace within is a global responsibility, and it will have global effects. So, Phillip, I see you nodding. At least I got this much right. Thank you for joining us for the second part of your interview. It was so fun, and we left people hanging with a couple of questions. Is conflict needed or necessary or natural? And you said it's natural, but let's talk about if it's necessary for growth.
Yeah, well, necessary. I think it is. I mean, first of all, let's just start with conflict as a natural part of life. And, you know, it's funny because I had a colleague who I loved dearly at Search for Common Ground. She was a South African peacekeeper, Susan Collin Marks. She would always say conflict is natural. So I kept asking, how is it natural? And she would say, no, there are differences. You know, we just have differences that can lead to conflict. And I kept inquiring, and there's a quote from Einstein that he says, we're all part of the universe, but we have our thoughts and emotions, we identify with them, and we feel like we're separate. And that's a form of optical delusion. And he says the key is to expand our circle of compassion to embrace all of humanity and all of life on Earth. And then inquiring further, Tara Brach, who is a Buddhist meditation instructor, I heard her speaking once when I was living in the Washington, D.C. area, and she was saying we have our thoughts, we have our emotions, we identify with them. And then, therefore, we feel separate. And that sense of separation creates the wanting self. I want to be happy. I want to avoid suffering. Mm-hmm. And then this wanting self looks outside of ourselves to start rearranging the world that's constantly changing to get things the way we want them so we can be happy and feel safe and to avoid suffering. So all of humanity is playing with that software package. You know, if you start looking at some of these spiritual teachings, we say it's the ego that feels separate. We identify with all of this. Now, the key part is, and then you can see how conflict is natural then, because I want this toy, you want this toy, you know, as kids, we can bump into each other or...
Because we're separate beings. In a way, it's because we're different that there will be interaction that is not always harmonious.
Right. And when that's being fueled by this, my happiness and my avoidance of pain depends on this, and we get oriented towards that way, we're going to bump into each other. And then when you take it further, when we then have a Western economy that is, advertisements are saying, you must look this way, you must buy this, you must buy that. Then we're really starting to activate this wanting self. I want this to be happy. I want this to avoid. So then it's accelerated.
And we want to belong deep down inside, and to have those things makes us belong to the group that does, you know, have those things. And we become one.
So that's one level. And then then going deeper, this is where I love Paramahansa Yogananda and been studying, you know, his interpretations of the Gita, that sense of separation. Then we have this parts of ourself that is being pulled into the world, and we have this part of ourself that's bringing us up into our spiritual self that wants to express to the world.
Okay.
So if you look at the esoteric teachings, there's a lot of internal dynamics that are going on that over many lifetimes that a soul is brought back into soul union. So that's a bigger topic. But if you just look at, Yogananda's interpretation of the Gita, it's 2 volumes of going on about this internal conflict. So
because if you took the Gita the way it's normally read, it's like Krishna says, shoot your uncle, right. It's okay, he'll die, he'll be born again, no worries, But you're saying Yogananda has a more metaphysical interpretation of it.
Right. And so there's this conflict between the ego, which is only identifying outside
with
and
the form,
fight to get things. And then there's this higher self of ourself that's trying to invite us back into us so that it can express through us our higher quality. Compassion, tolerance, forgiveness. Now, all of this may seem...
Well, that's beautiful. So really, if I see this in my own life, it's the moment that I connect with my inner higher dimensional vibrations, as well as my countenance, whoever I might have an encounter with, if I want to create more love, or if there is conflict, if I connect at that higher vibratory range of being divine, we come into harmony because we co-vibrate, right?
Yeah, we can, and I'll say that with also having been parts of meditation centers where I was mediating conflict in meditation center.
Okay.
But I think that's the exciting part.
Yes.
The spiritual practices really help us to start tap into. Richard Miller, a psychologist and founder of Nidra Yoga, would say a non-dual state.
Yeah.
And neuroscience is starting to measure which parts of the brain get activated. Like when we go into a non-dual state, we actually access the parts of our brain for compassion. Okay, so you take,
or develop those, right? Even the studies have been done when monks have gone into those 44 hertz brain waves and we're higher, they generate the part of the brain and actually build the part of the brain that is responsible for compassion.
Right, exactly. And there's been this exponential growth of people practicing yoga around the world. United Nations, it's declared June 21st International Day of Yoga.
Yeah.
So there's all these ancient technologies. And what really excites me, and this is a little bit of a sidestep and I'll come back, but what really excites me about the yoga is, Mahavatar Babaji and the great masters of the Himalayas hundreds of years ago planned on sending yoga to the West, but they waited until we have the understanding of quantum physics so we start understanding these ancient technologies, because they knew we were coming into an atomic age and that we would need the inner science of peace so that we could be in a place where we could handle the outer technologies. That lineage, Swami Sri Yukteswara Yogananda would say we've entered an age where technology, Dwapara age, where technology and information is expanding so fast that there's the potential of incredible violence and wars, and there's the
disconnect
atomic and great, parts of wealth, disparity of wealth and so forth. And there's the potential of sharing information. So we have this dynamic time where this ancient science of inner peace is coming together as teaching us how to deal with our inner conflicts between our ego and fearful self and going into a state of a soul of awareness. We have this spreading around the world. And then we have these growing crises, and then we have these peace-building technologies that help people who have a spiritual foundation then learn how to bring that into day-to-day interactions, like we were in the first segment, some of which we talked about. So it's a real dynamic time here, Ilona.
I'm thinking right now America is poised to have constantly these racial issues, scapegoating. Like in Germany, we had the Jews. Now it's turning out to be Muslims. Right. But I'm thinking back of America. I'm thinking back of Europe. Before the kingdoms and the emperors, we had little tribes. Germany was a feuding tribal little nation. In America, just not 200 years ago, we had the North and the South feuding over different values. And yet, after that was broken and higher principles were called into action and everybody agreed on living by higher principles, which was honoring equal rights to humans. At least it was first the males, then it was Black people, and then the women finally got some rights. It's like slowly, step by step, we fight, and then we hopefully, and maybe we tend to all do that, arise to a higher perspective of, if we are doing this well, we create a bigger whole, a bigger, greater whole.
Yes. And this is several things on this. Yes. And that's a wonderful look at where we are. And mean, several things. I mean, the yogic tradition would say that we have yugas, ascending and descending ages, and to think in terms of thousands of years of ascending consciousness and then descending consciousness. So that helps with perspective. The monks have always told me, act today to the best of your ability. You may not see the results, for lifetimes.
Okay.
So that's one aspect.
Yes.
The other thing is there's multiple. There's a dynamic and conflict I would really love to describe here.
Okay.
I've learned with Search for Common Ground that helps understand the polarization that's happening in the United States.
Right.
And the polarization here is serious. I mean, I was recently went to Washington, D.C. for a gathering of peace builders across North America to look at what could be done, because the language being used in Sierra Leone is the same, or the language being used in the States is the same language prior to the outbreak of a civil war.
Yeah. And okay, so what do we do?
Here's the dynamic. And once we start to understand this, then we can know how to engage with it in our daily life.
Yes.
Okay. So think of conflict, a pattern of conflict is kind of like a rainbow. And at the end of the rainbows, instead of having two pots of gold, you have extreme positions. Mm-hmm. And the extreme positions will be people who will drive their agenda with anger and fear. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the extreme positions often will have the loudest voices. Mm-hmm. And what they will do is they will confuse the problems can be shared. The problems can be economics, healthcare, environment, education. No, the problem becomes the other. Mm-hmm. The other extreme. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we start the separation in the other.
The myself and the other. Mm-hmm.
And when ego. When there's fear, we talked about this in the first segment. When there's fear, our amygdala gets triggered, and we go into fight, flight, and freeze, and we start to narrow our identity. Mm-hmm. We have multiple identities. I'm a man. I'm an uncle. I love to bike. I love to meditate. All these identities. I love to garden. No, suddenly it's like, I'm a Hutu, you're a Tutsi, I'm Israeli, you're Palestinian, I'm Republican, you're a Democrat.
Right.
And the slippery slope on that, what's used, the dynamic that is used by the extreme positions, and that we see this throughout history, stereotyping, demonizing, dehumanizing. And once you dehumanize,
then you can do anything.
See the Holocaust.
Yep.
The genocide in Rwanda, and here's the thing. So this is a human dynamic. We all have this potential. I mean, think of our listeners. How many of you have ever had fun enjoyed making fun of a political figure? Or
the blonde. I mean, takes it out of the political figure. Sure, we have lots of chances. So this is where once we and the peace building technology, Search for Common Ground, and major peace building organizations which have been emerging over the last few decades, what they do is they try to minimize the extreme position. Unfortunately, media in the West accentuates the extreme positions. Yes. The media work we were doing with Search for Common Ground across sub-Saharan Africa would expand the middle to decrease the power of the extreme position. Right. Unfortunately, the media in the West focused on the extreme position and empowered the extreme position. Yeah. Well, it sells the weapons.
Yeah. Well, it sells weapons, or looking at the political polarization in the United States, they flame the conflict. Now, the peace-building work of peace builders, you expand the middle, because most people want common ground. Most people can see their common humanity. And there's creative ways of doing that to help people rediscover the common humanity. And when that happens, and now neuroscience is starting to back it up, it awakens compassion, tolerance, and forgiveness. It awakens our higher capacities so that we can then go from attacking each other to ideally standing side by side and addressing problems together. And this is not airy-fairy. This is grounded, practical peace building, which is starting to be backed up by neuroscience, which leverages ancient spiritual traditions. And everything I'm talking about, people who are listening now start to engage. If you're tired about the political polarization in the United States or whatever country you're in, check yourself. Do you find yourself stereotyping, demonizing, dehumanizing? If you find yourself doing that, witness it, let go of that tendency, and then I can talk about tools.
Yes, let's go right into some tools because that's what we will need. I mean, My personal opinion is it's fueled. Divide and conquer is a great way to get at resources, is a great way to get certain mindsets through that had been planned decades ago. So instead of falling for the fodder and becoming fodder, stepping back and saying, wait a second, where's this going? Let's not play into this. Now, are we smart enough as a nation? And my big question is, where will it lead us if this conflict becomes resolved and a greater something evolves out of that?
Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge what you just said there. Let's not be fodder.
Yeah.
Because the Third Reich, and there's a wonderful quote, I don't have it handy, but it just basically says, it's easy to get to the people who do the will of a leader. Just tell them they're under attack. And there's a
just
quote,
tell them that they are under attack. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a recent quote from John Kelly, United States, saying, make no mistake, we are a country under attack.
Under attack, yeah.
So when you get people into that fear state,
yep,
then we can be manipulated. Okay, so again, listen to the first interview here, segment here, where we talked about your spiritual practice. Inner peace is a global responsibility, not only because we don't want to consume that fuels conflict. Here's the deeper part, and this is, again, being backed up by neuroscience, is when you go into that state, we mentioned the first one, we start to access our soul essence and higher qualities. Now, there's a wonderful work by Richard Miller, who's the founder of Nidra Yoga, and he's been working with the Veterans Association and the Defense Department of the United States to work with veterans with PTSD. And he takes them into Nidra Yoga to experience a non-dual state. And what he finds is when people go into the state, they feel their connection with something much larger.
There it is.
They feel that sense of connection on a visceral level.
Yep.
It awakens compassion, tolerance, and forgiveness. It starts a healing process. It also helps a person discover their life purpose in this moment in time.
Awesome. And
that life purpose often is to be of service to others.
To others, yep.
So spiritual practice is key. Okay, we get off the hedonic treadmill of massive consumption. B, we start to tap into our soul purpose, and that universal intelligence then will then guide us to be serving in a larger way. And there's a wonderful talk by Llewellyn Von Lee that I heard when he was talking to people in Silicon Valley and between mystics, is that universal intelligence, all the technology that ever exists in the future is already there. If we can access it when we are in the right consciousness. We can't be in a dualistic consciousness.
Yes. So you're saying unity of like instant communication is available when you go beyond time space into the 0 point of consciousness and then have instantaneous transmission.
Yeah. And so your daily spiritual practice, and then again, using some of these other peace building tools, some of the ones that we talked about earlier, and then you bring those into expression into the world, then we start to play. When I was in India with you, we were both there in India, I was interviewing different swamis and so forth. They were saying, look, there's a natural intelligence guiding everything. And then Michael Singer, in his book, The Surrender Experiment, he talks about following spirit to lead him. So I don't want to underestimate, oftentimes peace builders can just focus on the conflict resolution skills.
Right.
I want to emphasize the deep spiritual foundation and combine that with the conflict transformation, conflict resolution skill.
As a skill.
We can engage. And also, by having that deep inner spiritual part, we keep from getting burnt out. Because if we go into just activism and we're attached to outcome and it has to look the way that we think it needs to look, it leads to friction and burnout. So have that foundation. And now,
and I mean, I'm just seeing what you fundamentally said is the polarization of or identification in the ego state that is the fundamental fuel for conflict. So the moment we can step outside of our identification as a self and see the common ground, either energetically or even conceptually, and go, oh, let me hear that other person. What do they want? What are their needs? Or express my needs and feel heard. That's when we create that rainbow bridge.
And let me expand on this because, I was working, when I was working in Washington, D.C., people didn't discuss spirituality much, and yet there was great peace building work happening. So since we have an audience that I'm trusting,
Yes.
go to the deeper aspects, have that foundation. And then here's some simple tools you can combine it, because you're going to be interacting with people who may not have a deep
Right.
spiritual practice and so forth, or they may have a spiritual practice and spiritual egos battling, or some of the most
Right. Same possibility. Yes. Mm.
So one simple technique that I love, and I learned it from a man. He had gone to Tibet. He was an American corporate consultant, went to Tibet, spent a whole long time traveling to this monastery, and it was closed. And then there was Chinese guards there saying, you can't get in. And he was so angry and frustrated.
Mm.
Sat to the side, and then a Tibetan family came up, mother, son, or husband, wife, and daughter. And they heard it was closed, and they bowed and said, namaste. They sat down and had a picnic.
Mm-hmm.
And he went over and talked with them. And the little girl asked for words in English, and she was teaching him, and she taught him namaste. I bow to the spirit
divine
in me.
Yeah.
And she asked him, what's the word you have for namaste in English? And he was dumbfounded, because they had traveled. He learned they had traveled for days on a sacred pilgrimage, and they still said namaste to this garb. And then he realized he didn't have a word in English to acknowledge that. And then he realized when he would meet people, would just say, oh, hi, how are you? And he'd walk on.
Yeah.
He's like, wait a second. So when he went back to his company, and here's the tool, when he would see a colleague or anyone else on the street or in the grocery store, he would stop and say, inside, he would really look at them.
Mm.
And he would just acknowledge their humanity and divinity. And he said he noticed a shift in the office, that people were always stressed out and seemed to be, that suddenly
they felt seen.
There was a deep connectedness. People felt seen.
Mm.
They felt heard.
Yeah.
And combining that with good listening skills.
Yeah.
And then it built trust. So now he's teaching corporations how to build trust from a technique he learned from a little girl in Tibet.
Uh-huh.
And so it's simple.
Beautiful.
It's simple. And so I love doing this.
Mm-hmm.
When I go into the grocery store, at the checkout line, just really asking with the neighbors, taking time. And so you bring your meditation practice, be fully present, look at that person internally, acknowledge this is a spark of God.
Yeah.
Right here in front.
Right. And
then listen. And I'll show this how this plays out on the international level.
Right.
When we listen and really acknowledge what the other person's feeling, again, bringing in some nonviolent communication, acknowledging what their needs are, and just acknowledging a person, we feel valued and heard. And there's a woman up at Harvard, Donna Hicks, in her interview, it's in, you go to Summer of Peace, Inspiring Positive Social Change.
That's in that link above.
Figured out, go to Summer of Peace and go to Inspiring Positive Social Change, Donna Hicks. She's a Harvard high-level peace builder. And she's been going to these conflicts all around the world, and she was flying to Colombia, and she's like, she'd been thinking for a long time, conflicts, we have these dialogues, and then everything's okay, and then it just deteriorates. Mm-hmm. And she figured out it was the human dignity part that was not being acknowledged. Mm. So when she went into Colombia, she was supposed to lead a workshop on communication skills, and the president of Colombia, who was just going to be there for the beginning and then leave, he asked her, so what kind of communication skills? She says, we're not going to talk about communication. We're going to talk about human dignity. He canceled his meetings, stayed for the entire thing.
Wow.
And that contributed to the process in Colombia. And then she was working with Desmond Tutu in Northern Ireland. And she said to Desmond Tutu, I think a big part of it is that they're taking away each other's human dignity. And he's like, you've got it. Human dignity is important, but you can never allow someone to take away your human dignity. And he pointed to Mandela. So here's the part that's key. We really want to acknowledge our own human dignity by being in touch with this deeper soul essence and knowing we're part of something larger.
Okay.
And when we acknowledge that in the other person, it creates the foundation. Then we can use these communication skills, acknowledging and being heard. I mean, think about what's going on with North Korea, or think about the tension between the U.S. and Iran. And I was just in Iran for 2 weeks last year. And, we have all this demonization, and, and Search for Common Ground had set up, the first projects going back and forth in Iran. When I got to Iran, people greeted me with open, loving arms. You're like, we love Americans. I was so touched.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we really want to take the time.
Yeah.
Each of us, slow down.
Yeah.
Be present with one another. Know that we're acknowledging this. And that by us doing that, we create the space for the other person to feel safe, be seen, be heard, get out of the fight, flight, and freeze mode,
Yeah.
And so they can bring forth their higher qualities, whether or not they have a meditation or yoga practice, doesn't matter. You can create that space. So that technique, that namaste, deep listening, repeating back, asking acknowledging what the other person's feeling, acknowledging what their unmet needs are, and the peace building that's happening. I mean, someone from Harvard's doing this in Colombia, Northern Ireland.
Awesome.
Desmond Tutu's doing this. These are skills that each of us can do on a daily basis.
Yes.
And definitely, if you're in the United States or another country where there's this political demonization going on, don't participate with it.
Yep.
And look for the innovative ways that are emerging.
Right.
And tell those stories and feed those stories and participate in those stories.
I mean, they're two. Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying, and it's so true. So really dive in, become aware of the core of your being, and develop that your own dignity. Come in touch with that divine spark, and be it, feel it, honor it every day, and then you can more easily feel it in another and find it, and then even project and imagine that all these beings, no matter how evil they appear to us or being told to us, they all are the same divine being, and we could create a fantasy journey around what do they really want. We could ask them in our minds. We could say, if you had what you really wanted, what do you really want? Instead of projecting the hatred, we go another level up and go, and if you had what you wanted, and then what is the higher outcome for both of us? What would we want? Dr. Vernon Wolf is on this. He has taken people into relives, and people experience heart-wrenching bloodshed, and then they take the higher selves of these beings who participated into this council of higher selves outside of time and space, and they said, well, what did you want? And it's like, well, I mean, they wanted to bond, to love, to care. It's the ultimate what we really want. So bypassing conflict in a way that we become more wave-oriented, more energy, and then more consciousness-oriented.
Yeah, and being present with conflict, and with everything you said, absolutely. And we want to, I'll get triggered,
Yeah.
We all get triggered, and we don't want to deny that part of ourselves. We want to be present to it. And this is the part where it goes really deep.
Yeah.
I recommend Mickey Singer's The Untethered Soul, where he talks about, okay, when something gets triggered, that's old energy inside of us. If we can be present with this and relax and not react to it, it can release from us.
Yeah.
It can actually release from us. And, again, I think Mickey Singer's Untethered Soul is a wonderful read on that. And I mean, I met Mickey back in '89, and I'm still learning from Mickey. It's like, so conflict, it's going to hit our buttons. When it hits our buttons, it's like, be with it, witness it. And he would say, lean away from it, meaning you're not acting from it or trying to suppress it or this or that. You're just with it. And then you're relaxing, allowing it to release. And he says when you lean away from it, you're actually leaning into this higher part of yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And then this is the part that gets really profound. When you talk about what's possible, in our current world, I don't think I can't at least fully imagine what's possible when more and more people really surrender to this natural intelligence to act through us, and that it will act through us.
Okay, I like that.
More discerning, and it can act in a fierce way too. Being spiritual doesn't mean that everything's woo woo. You just it's like when that natural
decisive
goes through, it can be very decisive, because what it's doing, it's really helping dissolve delusion of separation, and that light can be very strong. And again, I believe a lot of the major peace-building practices that are emerging around the world are leveraging these ancient sciences. And that conversation is just starting between the neuroscientists, peace builders, and spiritual practitioners. And I would acknowledge the people of the Alliance for Peace Building, a major organization in Washington, D.C., which has got a grant from the U.S. Institute of Peace to explore, this, looking at this intersection. They call it rewiring the brain for peace. So I want to give, a big knowledge to them for finally bringing the peace building arena into looking at this dynamic intersection of science and spirituality.
And I love how in the first segment you also said, talk to your neighbors, that's where a lot of conflicts already start. People build a fence, they can't stand it. Oh, you didn't cut your bush the right way. It's like, it's like start giving understanding. Go, what are their needs? What can I help? Maybe they're old, maybe they're grumpy, maybe they're hurting, maybe they've never had the love. What would you suggest? You have some techniques?
Exactly right there. And I want to draw upon a technique that I learned from my friend Emily Hine, who studied at Stanford University's Center for Compassion, Altruism, and Research Education.
Okay. Right.
But exactly what you said. We don't know the story behind a person. We don't know where they've been. And I'll give 2 examples. And so like Emily has a practice called Just Like Me. She says, you just say, just like me, they have a mother and father, or just like me, they want to be happy. They
common ground, yes.
They want safety and this and that. And you start that practice just like me with somebody that you know and you love.
Yeah.
Oh, just like me.
Yes.
And then you do that practice and you visualize a person, someone that you may interact with but you don't know very well. And then when you're ready, you do the just like me for someone maybe who called you pain.
Yeah.
And then you realize that just like me, underneath of all of these actions,
beautiful.
It doesn't mean condone their behavior.
Right.
It's like, just like me, inside of there's really a soul, and then there's this ego, that wants to be happy, wants to avoid suffering.
Understood.
And so just like me, you can just visualize someone you love first, just like me. They want happiness, they want love, they want care, they want safety. Do that meditation with somebody that you just know, and then do it with somebody else that you have maybe some challenges with. That just like me.
That's a beautiful sentence. I mean, that's what friends do. Or people, when they meet each other, I've heard that sentence, oh, I do that. Oh, I'm like that. Oh, this is like me. And they look for the similarities. And did you know that marriage counselors know when a relationship is going to part?
Oh, how is that?
Well, they look at their description of how they started to meet, and they re-script the beginning, and they find all the differences in their pulling themselves apart at the beginning of the beginning story. So in the beginning, we look for similarities and go, oh yeah, I love that. And that's how we build bridges. So that's the one to remember. I love that. And, I also want to add NVC, nonviolent communication, which was developed in this day and age and made known by Marshall Rosenberg, cut down probably the conflict and arguing time 80%. In my relationship with my husband, 80%. It's just by developing these hard, big, full giraffe ears, as he calls them, to say, what is it that you, sharing from the I feel rather than you are, and rather than blaming and shaming, we go into, let me, share what's going on here and what my needs are, and negotiate for a meeting of the needs. So I just want to, because I know you speak fast, all these things, heart math and NVC, powerful tools. They were like worth a year study in and of themselves, each of them,
Yeah. I love the personal testimony there too.
Yes. Okay. Go for it.
Well, I mean, what you just said is cut down the conflict, or it's transformed the conflict by 80%. And recently I was with some friends in the meditation group, and I recommended Rita Marie's book, Completely Connected, that combines heart math and nonviolent communication. I recommended to one man, and he wrote, like, I love this. A few weeks later, his wife came up to me, she's like, it works! He said it's the first time in our marriage he's acknowledged my feelings.
Active listening, right? I mean, it's like, oh, you are heard. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
All you have to do is mirror somebody's speech and say, oh, so you feel heard. Getting that over our lips when we feel like, oh, they just attacked me. They told me I'm bad. They didn't. They just said they feel heard. They got hurt. Let's just hear them out.
Yes, exactly. I love that. Just getting over that instinct.
Initial. I know. And Don and I did that too. I love this technique. And we did it for a while until it wore off. And we realized, a tendency of us humans to blame, it's all your fault. So we caught ourselves, and we would go, oh, and then we would put on that voice that said, oh, I just caught myself saying it's all your fault. And we would say, no, it really is all your fault, and say it in an exaggerated way that let the other person know that I realized I was just totally blaming and making the other point. And you know what? Sometimes it's just, I don't know what it is. It's in the brain of humans. We love to be innocent and pure and be lovable. So, of course, any blame has to be the other one, not me, right? So we'll go like, no, it really was your fault. None of mine. No. And the other one said, yeah. It's all my fault. You're so sweet and so good. And just play with that primitive part of the brain, but don't buy into it. It's not really happening. It's a game of our brain that is like still stuck in 2 years old,
Right. I love that.
and I just love being aware that different parts of our brain talk at different times. And, we, of course, and I have to admit, we outgrew a lot of this blame thing by doing it in the, oh, I just caught myself. No, it really is your fault. Now, did you get that? I really believe that now. And the other one goes, wink, wink, I got it. You're out of that shame, blame thing. Good.
I love it. That's beautiful.
Okay. Spiritually bypassing other people's experiencing. I mean, becoming really grounded in spirituality and having my way to heaven, and then what do I do with conflict? That's what a lot of people do. They go into their little ivory tower, they talk to God, and then when they come back, they go like, oh, shoot, conflict is still down there.
That's a key thing. I think it's important for each of us not to spiritually bypass. I mean, recently I had something that really triggered me in my life, and I started working with a colleague, and she's like, "You're angry." I was like, "Yeah, but I don't want to be." Wait a second.
Yeah.
She's like, "No," and so she just really invited me into experiencing, and just. So we don't want to just bypass, because there's parts of ourselves that we really need to, and this is where, find the tools, or that the person to work with, this is someone who I really highly respect, who can invite me to, okay, it's safe to go into these feelings. Experience them.
Yes.
From a non-dual place, integrate them. Because again, I mean, we've heard the saying, what we suppress,
persists. What you resist persists.
Or it will just blow up out the side or something like that. So it's really important that we not, yes, we can have these transcendent experiences, and oftentimes, some of my mentors have said, when we get in touch with really strong spiritual energies, it will bring up uncooked things.
It does, right? Exactly. And we have to be having tools to handle it.
Yes, and so when that purification process is coming, if we just go off the handle with what's coming up, those energies aren't released. So there's that level. The other part I learned from interviewing. I interviewed a beautiful woman, and her talk is in the Inspiring Positive Social Change, Roxy Manning. And
okay, can you repeat that? I think that was a little, can you repeat that? You will find that under the link upstairs that we up there, and then you go and look for what?
Summer of Peace, and click on Positive Social Change.
Positive?
Social Change.
Social Change, okay, gotcha.
And then go to the Communications Week. And Roxy Manning talks about nonviolent communication.
Okay.
She's from the Caribbean, and she had moved to the Bronx, Harlem, in New York, and was bullied a lot, this and that. So I asked her about, how does she approach it when people say we're all one? Mm-hmm. She's like, yes, we are all one. At the same time, you want to acknowledge the experience and the stories that people have. And he says, we don't want to just bypass over that. And another person, Rhonda McGee, who's also in that same summit, speaking on compassion, she says, yeah, we can experience this oneness, through meditation and mindfulness, and we can experience it, and yet we never ever want to just say, oh, we're all one, let's get along, and just not acknowledge the experience of whether it's someone who's growing up inner city, a place of color, or Native American growing up, or rural Indiana farm and factory community. So we never want to just bowl over. One person says it's spiritually abusive to say we're all one, get over it.
Right.
So it's like, can we hold this narrative that we are one from the same source, and can we hold the space for all these different narratives
Right.
to also exist without getting lost in any one particular narrative, and yet also honoring the experience, and so
Right.
that there can be the healing. So that's a real important thing.
Yes.
That's been one thing that I've been learning just from interacting with our different people in the summits and our different faculties, like how to hold that. I know we're all one because I feel it in meditation. And also, I don't know what it's like to grow up, in
Right.
South Dakota on a reservation, or
Right.
in inner city Oakland, or I know what it's like growing up, in a factory town, a farm factory town.
So my question to you is, and I would like, I mean, this is my personal, we're already over time, but hey, since we're at it, everybody who has had enough can already turn out. But here is my final question to you, and I led into it a little bit earlier. Do you feel that by the nature of manifestation, the nature of reality as we experience it exists based on the fact that everything is separate, even though underneath of it there is the intense common ground of oneness, there is God. There is no scientist that has yet found the God particle. It's not a particle. It's a beyond particles, we have the wave function. Beyond the wave function, we have the isness state, consciousness. So you actually know beyond energy, we have informational fields. Beyond informational fields, we have consciousness that then comes from the zero state. So let's just say it densifies, it comes into form and gives us this incredible ability to encounter one another, to see, to perceive, to have unity if we wish to, but have also identity and separateness, which dances, it allows a dance of God in the many rather than being this flat line. And if we have the polarization embedded within the nature of manifestation, even in the energetics, even in the thought realms, we have, if you can describe one thing, it's not the other, right? We have polarization in a subtle form. People can have wars over beliefs, if this is that, no, this is not that, The yogis used to debate, the non-dual state, and they said, no, if I have a better non-dual state than your non-dual state, Is duality a fundamental structure, and thereby conflict is a primitive way of creating unity, and then whoever is ready to experience the next higher level of expression of manifestation can rise into the next level of unity? Is that, two questions in here. Is that the nature of life? And two, does it have to do with the state of evolution of consciousness, how much unity you can perceive?
These are really
big questions. I know. Since I have you here in front of me.
Yeah, well, and these are questions I've reflected on a lot, and this is where I have to bow to the great masters, because believe me, when I was going in and out of Sierra Leone and seeing, former child soldiers, seeing one of the houses I lived in had been blown up by a rocket-propelled grenade, and hearing these stories, I experienced such intense reactions inside myself.
Yeah.
And I was like, how can all of this be God? All of this.
Yes.
When you go into these yogic traditions or whatever traditions, all of it is God.
Yeah.
And so there's this part of me that was really, really kind of, at one point, and you'll read this in my book, I just went through this phase where my mentor says, he says, you're going to go out of your mind.
Right.
And that's the goal.
Okay. Right.
Because I couldn't figure out how God could allow all of this to happen.
And that's the key question here for a lot of people.
Yeah. And it was interesting. It's kind of like the mind, he says, you will go out of your mind. That's the goal. It's like, because my mind could not figure out how God will allow this all to happen.
Right.
And then, in going into meditation, we go into these states that are more subtle than thought. Mm-hmm. And we go into these states of this collectiveness. And then we come back into the realm of thoughts and separation and duality.
Right.
And, and unfortunately, if the yogic traditions are accurate, there's God transcendent beyond creation.
Right.
And then inside of creation, there's Maya that's got things set up inside of duality. And it's just the nature of the dynamic. Now, what I think it's interesting is
And maybe the beauty of it, maybe the beauty, because without it, there wouldn't be the flower or me perceiving the flower.
Right.
Me perceiving love, me perceiving God in you.
God perceiving God in a different form.
Yeah.
And that's the part that gets really intriguing. I think it's important not to do a spiritual bypass around the angers and frustrations around violence in the world. And again, my book really goes into very raw, authentic, how to integrate that into a deep practice.
Yes.
And this, what you said, I think is really interesting. You know, different yogis talk about, you know, recently talked with Sat Shri, a beautiful yogi who had just an awakening experience. It's like the universal intelligence, you know, the path, he would say, is like we go from the ego self to the self, the soul awareness, and then into God and then truth. Mm-hmm. And then a person learns to become more and more stable in each of those states of consciousness. And when we're in the ego state and we don't have the experience of these other states of consciousness, of course, none of it's going to make sense. So that's why, you know, my mentor was saying, out of the mind, because the ego is not going to figure it out. But once a person starts to have these direct experiences, then, as he would say, and, you know, you can, you know, this is Sat Shri talking about when he went into an enlightened states, like the universal purpose is consciousness is manifesting through us, so it can experience itself in these multiple different ways.
Beautiful.
And so consciousness is doing this, and natural intelligence is expressing through us, and that natural intelligence right now on earth is manifesting multiple different spiritual traditions spreading around the world, so people and it's also expressing these multiple different peace building technologies, so people can start moving towards that. And it's, you know, it's bringing neuroscience and different types of scientific research. So that natural intelligence is manifesting these ways that's helping each of us where we are on our spiritual journey, that we can start moving into a greater place of understanding of our connectedness, interdependence, and so forth.
Yeah. And all conflict that has gone before us has brought us to greater levels of unification, has it not?
Yes, it will. And the problems that we're facing today, climate change and some of these larger problems, it will take an unprecedented level of collaboration.
Yes, unification. Yep.
To solve the problem. And then there'll be the next one.
Yeah. And I think that's the nature of life. It's these stepping stones. These problems become stepping stones for us to accept greater unity. I mean, eventually we will all look, you know, maybe a little bit brown, but we look around and we go, there is no more the white race, the black race, the green race, and the yellow race, or whatever we might have, you know. It's like us here on this planet. We will reach that place because that's the nature of life. It merges, it intermarries, and it loves to create a new structure, something that hasn't been there before, and a greater unity. So,
yes, and it may not all happen in our lifetime. And the fun part is we all get to fall deeply in love with Spirit, God, Divine Mother, whatever form works for you. Make love with it, and then allow it to express through us its own unique expression through our faculties.
Yeah, be who you are.
Allow her to unfold through the ages, whatever will be.
Yeah, awesome. We are on a divine journey.
Yes, we are.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, namaste. Thank you for all the tips and techniques that we can take into our daily life and harmonize our hormonal level, our brain physiology, as well as our interaction with people, and see the common ground. God in conflict. Thank you so much, Philip. Bye.
Thank you, Ilona. Thank you for who you are and all you're doing.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.